tonight. I'm Diana Matthews. My last name is actually Somerton, but just not legally. And this is my husband, Larry Somerton. You guys might know Larry. He's the mulch guy. He's also a really good musician and singer. And so he's pretty well known in these parts. So tonight our presentation is going to be about Padanaram, kind of about how it started, what it was like back then, all the way up through almost 6 decades. That's when it's been around for almost 6 decades. So, and Larry has been there for 5 of the 6 decades. So Larry is going to be sharing quite a bit of his story and the story of the valley. One thing we figured out though pretty early on in trying to put this together is that there's so much to tell and there's such a story.
Can you pull your mic back just a little bit? It's echoing.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry.
Let me turn the master down.
Okay.
If I can get out.
Sorry about that. He's the mic expert. I should have.
Well, I've got it turned up.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Jeff, don't turn it down. It's good now.
It's good right now? I had it too close to my mouth. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
All right, keep talking.
Okay, keep talking. Okay, so what I was saying was that we found out pretty early on that we have a really big story to share. And so we're going to just have to do highlights, maybe a highlight or 2 from each decade. Because the story of Padanaram is the story of divine intervention. It's the story of miracles. It's the story of love for your neighbor, love for God, love for earth. And it's a story of a little bit of Wild Wild West times. And what's evolved into a really great community now that has close to 200 people still living there. Yes, so we've been around for 60 years almost. So what I would like to start with, and I'll advance the slides a little at a time. I'll have to start advancing them a lot at the time as we go on because I have 45 slides because I couldn't narrow it down because there's just such a beautiful story to tell. But perhaps, and I'm going to do a lot of this as an interview kind of format for Larry, because Larry is truly the expert. Oh, I've only been in the Valley for 16 years or so.
Newcomer.
I'm a newcomer. I'm a newcomer. To the people under 16, I've always been there, of course, but to everybody else, I'm still a newcomer. But I would like Larry then to maybe to tell the story of Daniel, because that's where we have to start, is the story of Daniel. Okay.
Okay. Daniel was a non-denominational minister in Indianapolis. And he always looked out through his crowd and said, you know, if we could put this electrician with this carpenter and this plumber, you know, there were people sitting there that couldn't afford to get their teeth fixed. There were people there that was so wealthy that they could just knock their teeth out and buy new ones, you know. So he thought that the world would be better off if there would be a place that would be more equal. Now you got to realize there's never anything that's totally equal. And to put that into perspective, if so-and-so gets a pair of eyeglasses, I have to have a pair of eyeglasses if everything's equal. So we tried to make it just as equal as we could, but the beginning story is Daniel had been meditating on this. He was a minister in Indianapolis, 10th Street and Central Avenue. He had a little white church, and there was an upstairs that he went in a lot in the evenings and stuff and meditated. And one night he was in his bed asleep, sound asleep, and he said, I was awoken by a voice that said, I will show you, and at that time he sat up in bed, my valley. So the voice said, I will show you my valley. And you got to realize that this was an audible outside of him voice. And he started looking around and, who said that? So he thought, well, I guess I'll get in the car. He had an old Lincoln, and he started driving from Indianapolis. And when he hit a T, 37 highway wasn't there. It was all back roads.
Tell me the year.
Huh?
The year?
Oh, this is in 1960 or 61. So he got in his car, and every time he'd come to a T, he would look both ways, but because he didn't know, he was getting guided, and he would feel at first a small bolt of energy. So then he knew if he looked that way, the energy came, he would go that way. So now he's worked his way. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and about 6 a.m., he is now easily finding these, every time he looks the way it should go, it's coming quicker and quicker and stronger. And he always said that he was driving through Silverville, and he said, I'm looking for gold, not silver. And so he went down the road a little ways more, then he turned and went up on top of the hill, and he went past the entrance, where we have our entrance now in Padanaram. And he said it felt like death hit him in the back of the car. But he was riding with death, so he stops the car. He backed up, and when he looked down that little tractor path at the time, he got this tremendous voltage coming through his body. So then he went to the bottom of that hill and stopped the car. By now he was in an ecstasy that you only get from the Spirit of God, basically. And he got out of the car, and he wanted to thank God for showing him his sacred place. And so he was going to get down on his knees and say, thank you, God. And he heard another voice say, here men will take off their shoes. This is holy ground. And he was so startled, he said he looked around the trees to see who was talking. But there wasn't nobody there. So he got back in his car. Now it's in the spring, about 1961, and he drove down the road. It was a tractor path, basically. And he saw this old man out in the creek getting fish. This guy, he lived there. He was a hermit. And there was a 100-year-old farmhouse. And so Daniel got out of his car, and he started walking toward the guy, and he ran in the house. And then Daniel went and knocked on the door, and he said to the guy said to Daniel, you're a man of God, aren't you? Daniel said, yes, I am. So he talks to the guy for a while. His name was Dewey Fisher. Maybe some of you might know him, I don't know. He talked to him for a while, and then Daniel got back in his car, and he drove all the way down this road until he got stuck. And then he got out of the car and walked some more. And he saw this big rock, and there was a waterfall coming off of it. At that time, Daniel walked over to that big rock and stood on it, and he made a pledge to God. He said, if you let this place come into my hands, I will use it for your people. And that was the beginning of Padanaram. It wasn't named Padanaram. It was just a valley that Daniel had been led to by a spiritual being. However you want to say it, God or Krishna or whatever you want to say, it worked. And people get a little bit of a misconception. Now, Padanaram is where one of the holy men in the early Old Testament sent his sons to find daughters, because Padanaram was the only place that still had righteous people. So that's where he got that term. A lot of people call it the valley. A lot of people call it God's valley. But whatever you call it, it's still a viable thing today. So people started coming in. I should talk probably about when they first went there. Daniel had a place in Indianapolis. This is a real quick story, but he had paid $12,000 for a church, but he still owed about another $12,000 for it. It belonged to the Baptists. So the Baptist minister came to him one day and said, "You've paid us $12,000, but we're going to evict you because you won't go to the seminars and the Baptist college." And so Daniel said, "Well, okay, catch you later." So he gets some property down by Wilbur, Indiana, which is south of Martinsville, just a little. And the property that he bought had an old outhouse on it in the back by the creek. He had 3 other guys with him. And the only way to get that outhouse moved was to, Daniel said, "Dump it over and we'll roll it." And all them guys are like, "Oh, you're crazy. When we do that, that thing's going to fall apart and it's going to just be terrible." Well, as soon as they knocked it over, a bag fell out on the ground. And one of the guys saw the bag and he went over and grabbed it and he looked at it and he took off running. And the other guys, of course, ran after him. And what do you think was in the bag?
Money.
$11,000.
Yeah.
And you know, the whole thing has been that way.
So so it was a couple of years of living, I don't know why I do that, sorry. It was a couple of, he taught me to do that, actually. That's
I
why.
have better microphones.
Oh, okay, he has better microphones. But it was a couple of years in between the time that Daniel found the valley the first time,
About 6 years.
about 6 years. And during that time, they moved to this place in Wilbur and had kind of the beginning of communal living. Because he had gotten kicked out of that church completely because he just had started to have different ideas, and he started to feel like that the church was not really of God anymore, it was of men. And that the people in the church, he saw them, like he looked out in the crowd one time and he saw some of them as like goats trying to get the highest point they can, and the lady playing the organ was like a bell cow, would just getting everybody to do what they wanted, and everybody had these different roles they were playing in the church, and none of it was for God. And so he tore all the pews out, all the altar out, put chairs like in a circle, and then everybody came to church the next Sunday, and they're like, "What the heck's going on?" And he's like, "We're not going to have a preacher anymore. We're all going to be on the same level. We're all going to share the Word of God together." And that didn't go over real well in an organized Baptist church. So after he got kind of ostracized from his congregation, that's when they moved to Wilbur and started living together. And then after they found that money, you can tell the story of what they used that money for.
I don't know. The $11,000 paid Daniel back for what he had put in that church. He had a congregation of 400 people, and it was going very well. Like Diana said, there was a woman that went there to play the piano and a guy that went there to play the guitar, and that's kind of why they went there. So when he tore out all the church furniture that you're so used to, it put all the ministers on the same level as the people. And that's the way he looked at life. Daniel was a very intelligent man, probably the smartest man I've ever met in my life. And I'm 70, and I've met a lot of men, worked with a lot of men. Anyway, they spent 4 or 5 years getting a semi-communal place there in Wilbur, Indiana. And every year or so, Daniel would drive from Indianapolis down to the land that God had showed him. And one day he went down there and there was a for sale sign. So he found out how much it was. It was $5,000 for 86 acres. And so I mean, this story is going to take, anyway. Anyway, the 86 acres was purchased when Daniel borrowed $5,000 from a guy named Bill Sluter. Was it? Yeah, Bill Sluter. He owned a chain of hamburger joints in Indianapolis called Pepe's Grill. And we were in Indianapolis the other day. My granddaughter was in the hospital, and we were sitting on the road right there, and I looked up and there was a sign that said Pepe's Grill.
We ended up right there in front of the same place.
Right there where the guy owned it.
Yeah.
Anyway, he loaned Daniel $5,000. Daniel bought the property. After he took the church furniture out, people knew that he was off his rocker. He had 12 people left. And of the 12, there was about 4 kids. So he really had, you know, a very small ministry. And he said, okay, we're ready to move down to Williams, Indiana. So all those 12 people came, but Daniel mostly came on the weekends with another guy for a few months until they got some things established. Now these are city boys. Every single person that was in that group had never been in the woods. They were city boys. So here they are starting to build houses, the first thing they built was a big lodge.
Is it that one?
That is.
That
big.
is.
Yeah. And they built this big lodge, but they didn't know what they were doing. So they'd go to town and watch other people hammer, they'd figure it out doing that. So then they were going to do an agrarian lifestyle. That means they were going to have goats, and they were going to skin the goats and have their deer hides for shoes and all the things. And what they found out was that to be self-sufficient, you have to be wealthy. So they weren't wealthy. They were extremely poor. Everything that we've ever done was started with no money. So Daniel ended up paying the $5,000 back, I think. And
He was kind of a pirate too.
but these 12 people went down there, or 8 people went down there, and they started a living. They wanted to grow crops, and like I said, when the first rain came and wiped out their garden, then they're going to say, what are we going to do now? So their idea was to build a milking place. They wanted to have a dairy. So they wanted to build a barn. And they went to town, Daniel went to town, and he asked one of the guys in town that had a sawmill. He said, how much money would it cost to build a barn down there? He said $5,000, and Daniel said, well, you don't have that kind of money. The guy said, didn't you just buy that 86 acres? Daniel said, yes. He said, well, there's a lot of timber on it. Get yourself a sawmill and cut the timber and make your own barn wood. So he said, yeah, it's a good idea. So they're working on this house one day, this big lodge, and Daniel was getting a chisel, and a piece of that chisel went in his eye, embedded in his left eye. So he got in the car and with another man driving, and they drove up to Indianapolis to get that piece of chisel out of his eye, and a drunk came out of the alley and cut that car in half and knocked that piece of chisel deeper in his eye. So now he's sitting there. From that, he got a $6,000 settlement. What do you think they did with it? They bought a sawmill, they bought a truck, and they bought a loader. And they started cutting lumber. Now the sawyer, the guy that cut the logs, was the sawyer because his dad was a sawyer. But this guy didn't even know nothing about it. But his dad, it must have been in his genetics. He's going to be a sawyer. The guy that graded the lumber knew a few species of the boards, so he was the lumber grader. So they get these, the guy said, okay, now you can take that lumber to town. Does anybody know Bert Lewis in this room? Bert Lewis came down to there and said, because they were just making the boards to build the barn. He said, that's the finest lumber I've ever seen. You should take that to town and sell it. And Daniel was like, wow, we can start making a little money on this. They loaded by hand 2 bundles of lumber, took them to town, came back with $287, and were praising the Lord that they were rich. But what it did is it turned the tide from being agrarian to a sawmill community. Now we own the means of production and the distribution of the goods. And you know, we were our own boss. No one was there to tell us what to do, but the sawmill business eventually got huge. We had there's so many things I could say about it. But once again, all that was started with no money, just this one thing. And this is our motto in a way. It's how I live. I live by faith. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. Yesterday is gone. Right here is all we got. Right this second is all we got, for real. And the only thing we really own, anybody in the world, the only thing they really own is their word. And so I put a lot of stock into faith and how truthfully a person can be to me. Sometimes you have to kind of like skirt the truth a little bit and keep from hurting feelings, but you can go back on it and pretty soon you can teach them without being taught. So these are the things I've learned about being around people. Now people say Padanaram was a hippie commune. Look,
These guys do look like hippies.
Yeah,
we had beards. We had beards.
That's the first logging crew. They really knew nothing about logging.
So
About what year is this?
That's 1975, 76.
Yeah, we were just talking, that was the era. I mean, that was just,
That's how everybody's hair was. But, I mean, it was kind of it's a commune.
my hair was longer than anybody's in this picture.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, if you're going to leave society,
If you're gonna leave society, and there's gotta, I mean, you kind of are anti-establishment at that point, right? I mean, you're leaving society, you're gonna go out in the world, go make a new world, utopia, live in a commune, share all things, work for your food, work for your raiment. You didn't really need money because everything was provided to you. Everybody put everything in the pot. All the meals were cooked in one central building. Nobody had kitchens where they were living. They had dorm-style sleeping quarters. There wasn't even running a bathroom. There wasn't even a bathroom until 1980. There were outhouses until 1980. So if you're living like that, yeah, you're kind of a hippie. You're kind of anti-establishment. You don't want what the world has to offer. You want something different. And these men and women who did this wanted something different. And so they devoted their life, and I mean their total lives, their livelihood was devoted to building this way of life. Was there some wild, wild west times? Absolutely. Was there some rough and tumble fights? 100%. But there was a group of people who were scraping and sweating and giving their blood for something they believed in that was higher than them. A faith, a belief that God was directing their paths, that God was in charge, that God would take care of them. And they ended up coming up with 5 simple principles to live by. And I don't know if I can remember all 5, but I know a couple of them. One of them is that the footprints on the earth is in relation to the weight that you're carrying. So for he who has much, much is required. The other thing is that if you don't work, you don't eat. Other thing is love your neighbor as yourself. That's the golden rule, and live that way. There was 2 other ones. They're in there.
Much is required.
Yes. Well, I think I said that one. Yeah, Joy was there.
Yeah.
She was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's more people than you would realize, when I first met Larry, I mean, who's been to the open houses?
Oh, yeah.
You've been to an open house, you've been to an open house, okay.
Like a bazillion years ago.
Bazillion years ago, right. Who had never heard of Padanaram until tonight? Oh, okay, there's a couple of people. Okay. I'm surprised because the rumors sure fly around small towns, and there's a lot of them. But you'd be surprised at the number of people who are connected to Padanaram in some way or another. And the people who have come out of what Daniel and a lot of the elders say, then this magnificent obsession. And that's what it was, a magnificent obsession. So I'm sorry, I had to just kind of grab it. This is just some more stuff from, I'm going to move it along because we're going to talk just about this part the whole time because the beginning was so interesting, but so is today. So today is really interesting too, and so I don't want to only stick with that. But these are just some pictures of the early lumber industry.
That was probably like in the 70s?
That was in the 70s, yes. The lumber industry there started in about 68, actually. But in the 70s, it was going strong. Larry got there in 75, and he was immediately put out to the woods. You may have heard of Good Earth Compost Company, Good Earth in Bloomington. That was originally, and that is a valley of Padanaram property. We had a school, the kids needed to go to school, and so we had a school, and in the early 70s, this was just like everyday life. There were colleges that would come down, Hanover College would come down and bring students. There was a lot of connection with the University of Southern Indiana. There was music always. There's Larry up there in the corner with a guitar. See him up there?
Did they bring students to learn? Or to
They brought students to learn and to work and to see what communal living was about. They would go back and write papers. Yeah. That's the Springville store right down there. That's a bunch of kids on their bicycles. They would ride and get sodas. It was pretty idyllic.
Silverville, not Springville.
Oh, I'm sorry, Silverville. Larry. He's laughing at me. All the kids in the back of the pickup truck. See, I come at it from a different point of view. I wasn't there during this. So it was hard work. It was blood and sweat. It's a very amazing story to me, but it was life to the people who lived there. And it wasn't an easy life by any means.
There I am again
Yeah, there he is.
at 21 years old. I think I still look the same. But
Gentlemen, you want to talk about Dallas?
yeah, Delmas is a part of the 12, and the black man here. And of course, in those days, in 1966, 67, 66 is when they came down. And as time went by, what Daniel did with Delmas was he became the buyer. And we only had 2 or 3 trucks, but Delmas was the one Daniel sent to town to buy food.
That's 1966.
So he got to know the Cosners. He got to know all the people that were in the stores, and he was a fine man. He was a black man, but it was kind of rare in Bedford, Indiana. So people thought, well, he's just down there trying to get the white women. The guy that was the furthest thing from his mind. He was there for the same reason I was. I found a guy that knew who God was, in my eyes, and that's why I was there. That's why I stayed there. That's why I went through all the things I did.
I got a question. At the booming years of the community, was it like 400 or 500 people?
No,
Couple hundred?
the most that I remember ever seeing was 240, something like that, 240. But we've had probably 150 babies born there. I've had 4 children. My 4 children, biological children, were born right on my bed with no midwives. And Daniel used to say, well, we cheated the system out of another $100,000.
We still do home births, but we use midwives, so. But they did not then, though. And it was fine. There was a couple of,
There was a couple of, dang it. There was a couple of scary moments, and there was a scary moment Larry was involved in when one of the babies being born's arm came out first. And he had to help carry the mom to the car and rush her to town, but the baby's fine. She's a grown woman with 2 children of her own now. So, I mean, there were scary times, but, what? I knew he'd never let me talk.
Well, the total goal, you know, like we're talking about a lifestyle. And the lifestyle, the basic lifestyle, is a survival technique. And I always say that if the pilgrims that landed on Plymouth Rock didn't live communally, they would have all died, instead of only half of them dying. And when you love your neighbor as yourself, you really love your neighbor as yourself. You know, you're helping build his house, or her house, whatever. But the idea that Daniel put in my head is that this can be an international communal utopia.
I have one question I'd like to ask, please. The rumors were, back in the Jim Jones situation, that Jim Jones had approached Daniel, being from Indianapolis and knowing each other, and offered him to bring his group of people to South America, and Daniel could not get his followers to go down there. Is that true?
I can answer that real quick. Jim Jones came to Daniel's churches in Indianapolis. When Jim Jones was very starting out as a preacher, he would go to Daniel's churches. And Daniel told Jim Jones to get out of the ministry. Daniel told me this. See, the reason I know so much about Daniel is I was married to his older daughter, and I was his driver. I drove him all over the country. And, you know, he would talk to me about very natural things, base things. Jim Jones started doing monkey acts. He started doing things to get people to come to his church. And they were there mostly for the circus part of it, you know. But Daniel told him, get out of the ministry, because you are not meant to be in the ministry. Daniel saw something in him that wasn't correct. A minister is a father to his congregation. They look at that minister as a man that can do no wrong, and he's not going to be a child molester. He's not going to be a guy that's just there for show. He's supposed to be there. He's supposed to be sent by God. And this is one problem I have with religion. If you're sent by God, you're not getting paid. You're not getting elected. You got elected by God, and then you came there, and then you're going to just do the best for your people you can. They just turn into your kids. They turn into your people. And Jim Jones didn't have that kind of mentality. And so that's why I'm saying that Daniel told Jim Jones, and Daniel told me this, to get out of the ministry, way back in Indianapolis. You'll see he was from Indianapolis. Then he went to Ghana. I actually had a great aunt that was down there and drank the Kool-Aid. But you're safe to drink the Kool-Aid in Padanaram anytime.
We're not going to invite anybody down to drink Kool-Aid, though, I promise.
Not a good idea.
That's not a good idea, no.
But I will tell you that when Waco happened, you remember Waco? Okay, when we have a meeting, we first started having meetings in 1980, and we invited the public. We invited the FBI, we invited the President of the United States, we invited anybody you can say in politics. Jerry Denbo in French Lick is a great friend of ours. He's done a lot of good for us. So, let me see, what was I saying?
Oh, about Waco.
Oh, Waco was avoidable because we were in touch, Padanaram, and it still is, in touch with all the local authorities. In Shoals, if the police want to see somebody in our village, we can just get them and bring them to them. And that's what could have happened at Waco. But the government had something to prove, So when Waco happened, we started devising a wall, a safety wall. We had 4 different ways that we could, me and another man got ham radio licenses, because a ham radio will run on 12 volts, because they shut the electricity off at Waco. We got a bell in our front yard, a great big bell, and you hear that bell ringing, everybody to this day still knows what that is. We had 2-way radios in every big building, and we had direct lines to the police. You know, if something like that would have happened in Padanaram, we got ready for it, because it happened in Ruby Ridge too. If you studied Ruby Ridge, I've studied it all, and I know a lot of the people that were involved in all that, because my ex-wife and I, we've been to 50 communes. There's a book that was put out in probably around 1990 that had 700 communes in it, and it showed where they were and how you could visit them and all that. They said they only got half of the communes that are in the United States in that book. So there's people that are living in cooperatively equal ways, even to this day, I'm sure. But Daniel was a very spiritual man, and he also was in tune with the outside world and knew what they were thinking, because we're all people, and we all know what we think. That's what everybody else thinks too. So, you know, we're just trying to do it a righteous way, trying to say, okay, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. If you need something, get it, but maybe not everybody needs that, you know. But, you know, I'll get off the soapbox.
I think it's important to know that that there are misconceptions out there, and that there's also a lot of kind of fear about what are these communes about. And Daniel would invite, and we are still very connected with governments. I mean, the prosecutor in Martin County is a Padanaram born and raised girl. The judge in Martin County is a Padanaram born and raised girl. We had a person that was a sheriff, a born and raised boy that was on the sheriff department in Martin County. So the difference between us and those other communes that had these troubles is that they didn't embrace the community and invite them in. They didn't embrace the local law enforcement and invite them in. These are some pictures of the early open houses. That's the first open house up there on that stage. The open houses were held starting in 1984? 1980, and went on until 1999. People came from all over. There's the Hare Krishners. The Hare Krishners visited. You know, I mean, there's just, they went around, Larry and Rachel, who is a wonderful friend of mine, the mother of my beautiful stepchildren and the grandmother of my wonderful grandchildren that I adore, and we're all very good friends. And Rachel and Larry traveled all over the United States and even abroad to go to these different communities and see, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And the people came to them too. People came to Padanaram. Some of the people who came to Padanaram were some of the ones that you really wouldn't want around. Some of them were militia types that had guns with them, but Daniel was a strong spiritual man. He was like, that's not our way. That's not what we do here. Has anybody have been to if you've ever been to Padanaram for an open house or something, you've probably seen this little rock house. Has anybody seen that rock house? I saw it on Indiana Lost and Forgotten Facebook page. I thought it was funny, but it's a playhouse for kids, but people called it all kinds of different things. A sniper spot, whatever. Yeah. This was a beautiful example of the garden harvest. In 1991, that they listed out all of the fruits of their labor in the garden that was on display at open house.
the Padanaram School, there's just some of the older pictures from there. And at the open house, they had a big explanation of what they did. They were in partnership with which school system?
Springfield.
Springville. That's this time it is Springville. And they were in partnership with them, and they had brought some of the curriculum in. Today, our school, we have a school again. It closed for a long time, but we have it again, and now we're in partnership. We're a satellite school, actually, for Shoals. So
Now, is it in Padanaram in Lawrence County or Martin County?
it's in Martin County, technically.
Very top.
Very, very, yeah.
Okay.
These are just some more of the pictures of the valley, and I want to kind of bring it ahead just to say that through the years, through the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of growth and flourishing, but there was also a lot of heartache and a lot of financial woes. And in the 80s, they had to start hiring people from the outside to work in the sawmill. They had to start giving paychecks because it just wasn't working out. They just needed to get more structured for the banks. The banks didn't like loaning money in that manner. And so because of some financial difficulties, they ended up incorporating. They ended up with having people from the outside working for them. And then eventually that caused the money to not be so communal. So people started to get jobs. And when that starts happening, and it stops being what it was originally. Daniel used to say, all pure water, what is it? All pure water flows back to the sea. And so the sea being the salt water, it's kind of polluted with salt, and this is some pure water. It went back to the sea, and so now the way Padanaram is that everybody has their own homes, everybody has their own jobs, everybody has their own bank accounts. All the land is held in common by Padanaram Inc., and there's 3,000 acres. It's beautiful. Paid for, yeah, 100% paid for. We have communal buildings, and we do pay in to make sure those are maintained, and we pay in, each adult that lives there pays into the pot to pay the taxes and those kind of things, but it's not communal financially anymore. And so that really when you're not financially dependent on each other, that changes the dynamic of a community. And so it started changing in the 90s because of that dynamic. And then Daniel, we lost him in 2001. And when we lost Daniel, things really changed because it was like, well, first off, Larry was mad that Daniel died. He was really mad because Daniel was not supposed to die, right?
Not in my life.
Daniel was not supposed to die. He was 84 years old. Yeah. And he was totally fine. He went to go up, he was out working, doing his normal thing during the day, went to go to bed, took the first step of 2 and fell backwards and was dead. So, and he always wanted to die with his boots on, and so he did. But after Daniel passed away, there was a period of time where, the valley kind of just was frozen, like
Limbo.
in limbo. Yeah, in limbo, kind of in shock. The barn was a really important place to us. We had a lot of parties there and events, and so from 2001 until about 2012, when Larry had his heart attack and open heart surgery, there was not a lot of connection among the people except for parties. That was the main connection. They did some things together, some meals and things like that, but after Larry had his heart attack and after a couple of other things happened, we started to see that there was a problem in the valley, that there were some kids that had kind of gone rogue, and there were some drugs in the valley. And that would never have ever happened under Daniel's eye. But without that rudder, people just were in limbo. And when we figured out that there was drugs in the valley, we got the sheriff involved in Martin County. And that's when a couple of our men became auxiliary deputies in Martin County, and we started to work on the drug problem. The sheriff was to come and speak on the morning of May 3rd in the valley to all the people about how to recognize a meth lab, what to do if you see it. But at midnight, our beautiful barn caught fire and burned to the ground. And we believe that it has something to do with us putting our foot down and eliminating the drug problem in the community. Good things happened from that, though. I mean, it's a tragic. We stood there, you can imagine, we just stood there. It makes me want to cry right now and watch that building just completely become engulfed. But that next day, we all met anyway, and we rallied like nothing else. And a spiritual revival came into the valley after that. And from that rubble, we rebuilt. And I would say there is a group of young men that are now in their 40s who are in the army of the Lord. I mean, they are working for God, they're working for good. There's no drug problems in the valley anymore now. If there is, it's about probably per capita the way it is anywhere, although actually hopefully not, because some of the surrounding towns are pretty bad. But we started working right away to build a place to gather again, because we have festivities every year, and we did not want our festivities to be interrupted by the loss of our barn. So we worked very hard, put a whole floor down overnight, basically in a building that had looked like this when we got started on it, the picture on the left. And then that year we were able to have a beautiful party. And we have just gorgeous events there. We have some very talented decorators, some women who are very, very talented decorators. We have men who will fix anything that's broken. We'll get into the trenches. We'll pull baby wipes out of the clogged sewers.
Hence, when Daniel looked at his congregation and said, the electricians, the carpenters, we could all band together. And what's happened, these children that grew up, and she's talking about the 40-year-olds, they saw that it was their time to start stepping up, you know. And now, these lumber companies, there's 3 lumber companies in the village. They make a lot of money, and they invest a lot of money back in it. These kids were born and raised there, that's their land. So, you know, what we always talk about the 5 phases of a city. And the first phase is phase 1. The phase 1 people are rough and tumble. There's hardly no law. There's no law west of the Pecos, you know, and there's a hanging judge. Remember Judge Roy Bean. Then here comes the farmers. After the phase 1 guys kind of like get in there and run around, the farmers come in. Then the technicians come in. They bring in the machinery. Then the professionals come in. This is phase 4, is the professionals. And then phase 5 is the priests and the judges and the presidents and that, you know. So that's the evolution of a city. That's the evolution of a country. Phase 1, you remember when America was phase 1, there was nothing, you know, east and west of the Mississippi. Then people started going out there, and they dug in the ground, and they were really rough and tumble people, and they had guns on, you know. Then here came the farmers, and, you know, as I explained. So that's where Padanaram is right now. Daniel said, some of you men won't make it past phase 2. And I'm almost that guy. I have a hard time thinking about people that just won't get out there and put their all into a project, you know. That's the phase 1 man. But anyway, this has been a great thing. If you have any questions at all.
I have more pictures.
She has more pictures.
You want to see them all? We got time.
Okay,
Oh,
good.
we got time? I thought we were out of time.
Well, let me tell you, these pictures we took yesterday.
We took these pictures yesterday with Larry's drone. He's got a drone, and he's a drone pilot. And so this is what the valley looks like now. This is the village. This is the original village, minus a few buildings that have burnt down.
This house was the 86, what we got with the 86 acres. When I came to the village, this was just like this. There was no roof on it. And so I helped build this. And the sawmill, we could walk to work up this trail right here. and that's where the sawmill was. When I first went to the village, I was 21 years old, and I got there on June 19th, and I didn't leave until July the 4th. I didn't know what day it was. I hadn't seen a newspaper, I hadn't seen a TV, I hadn't seen a radio because we didn't have any of that stuff. There was no TVs, no radios, by design, so that we could break a tie, you know, that we've all had. So I went out with a guy, and we had one truck for all the people. All the single guys, every time that truck would get parked, someone would jump in and take off. So the Rolling Stones were playing in Bloomington, and I knew that. So we got this truck, me and this other guy, and we went to Bloomington. And on the way home, I had only been there once in the daylight. I had never been there other than coming from the airport. And he fell asleep on the way home. I said, I think I can make my way. When 3 o'clock in the morning hit and I was still driving around about out of gas, I woke him up and he said, where are we? I said, I don't know. Because I was a city boy too, see, I was in the country.
So inside that building there is the remnants of that little farmhouse that was in the first few pictures. And they left a piece of the wall open so you can see the farmhouse still. It's in the women's room, but that's where it is. But that's what our main village looks like today. We have a school, K through 6, or K through 3. We have a nursery, and we have a preschool. Yeah, those are our common buildings. Most of the people don't live in those buildings, though.
So now, there is originally about 86 acres, and now it's like 3,000.
3,000 acres.
Is the sawmill still active? Is it still?
No, we have, the sawmill is not still active, and it hasn't been for many years, but there are 3 lumber companies that do have sawmills that are operated out of the valley, but they're not valley owned. There's 3 different businesses there that most of the people who are in the timber industry and that live in the valley work for one of those 3 businesses.
So there's 200 or 300 people live in the valley now?
About 180, including the kids, yeah.
Thank you.
That's the suburbs. We have the suburbs now. Our house, oh, you can't see our house.
Joyce, where this is the top of the hill at White's.
Yeah. So that's, Larry's son lives in this house.
So Larry, my question is, how old were you when you went to Padanaram, and why did you go there?
21.
Why did you go there?
There were some people that lived, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Uh-huh.
And I had a little woman there and everything. And I knew her family, and her family knew Daniel. Her dad knew Daniel back when he was a minister. He was a traveling minister.
Okay.
And he used to go to Arizona once in a while, and that's where he met them. And I had been up in Oregon hitchhiking.
Uh-huh.
I hitchhiked all up and down the west coast. I didn't have nothing going on. I didn't have no money, just a backpack and a guitar. And so when I came back to Phoenix, the man that I told you knew Daniel had a 13-year-old son that needed to be, he wanted me to escort him to Padanaram.
Oh, really?
And so I said, well, I guess I'll do it. So I had some stuff left in Phoenix I made enough money to buy half a plane ticket. So he bought my half a plane ticket and his son's full plane ticket. And we got to Indianapolis. I called Daniel on the phone. He said, okay, I'll have some people up there to get you tomorrow. I said, okay, good. So we landed in the airport in Indianapolis. I had 25 cents in my pocket. I used that to make a phone call. Remember pay phones?
Yeah. Now, what year was that?
1975.
Okay.
And so we laid out on the grass in the median in front of the airport. It's a lot different now, but from 7 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, we were so tired. All of a sudden, I look up and I see this pickup truck full of mud, and it had great big saw blades in the back. Have you seen a round saw blade that the sawmill has? There's a 56-inch saw blade in the back, 3 or 4 of them. I said, there they are. And what it was, and this was even more mind-blowing, it was two girls. And they were my age, you know, a little older maybe. Nowadays I'm older than most people, but they walked, I'm gonna tell you about my name.
Finish your story.
This is the same part of the story. So they come up there and I'm run out and I said, hey, are you from Padanaram? And they're like, yeah. So they said, what's your name? Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my name. I know we're getting close. But my name is Michael Lawrence Somerton, okay? And when I was 8 years old, everybody in the world was named Mike, including me. And so this friend of mine said, my name's Larry. He said, my real name's Lawrence. I said, oh, well, how does that work? He said, Lawrence is a lot like Richard and Dick and Bob and Robert. I said, okay. So I went home and I said, I'm Larry. But at that time, I moved away from my main aunts and uncles and all that, and got to Indiana, you know. And then when I went back to Oregon, I was with all those people again, so they called me Mike. I was 21 years
His
old.
mom started calling him Larry at his request.
Oh yeah, they had to. I wouldn't
He wouldn't answer.
So anyway, I get in the truck with Kay and Delessa. They said, what's your name? I said, how many Mikes are there down there? They said, 4. I said, how many Larrys are there? They said, 1. I said, I'm Larry. So anyway, we drove down. I'm from the desert.
Yeah.
So we drove down Highway 37, and if you've ever been to Padanaram, and I encourage you to come there anytime you can, and you go down that first hill, it's the most beautiful, peaceful sight that you've ever seen, and you feel it when you go in there. And I had never seen the woods like that. I'd been in the pines, but I had never seen Indiana woods, and that changed me. Anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
So you went there, then you just decided to stay? You just
What's that?
decided, when you did that, then you decided to stay?
Well, I'll tell you how I stayed.
I want to hear it all.
I mean, it's an interesting.
We might have to set another date for it.
It's an interesting story, but I came down. They gave me a place to sleep, and you know, in those days, if a guy walking in with a backpack wasn't nothing big, it was pretty normal. So I walked in. The girls dropped me off in the car, me and the 13-year-old, and I put my guitar down in my backpack, and I had long hair down to here. You know, I was a hippie. Anyway, my biggest problem was I didn't think I was going to ever get a pair of big belt Levi's again, you know, because now we're in Indiana, not California. Anyway,
Why'd you stay?
why did I stay? Well, I got up the first day, and everybody that came there had to go to a job. And I asked Daniel, what do you want me to do? And he didn't say nothing. So I just went where they were building, on that building I showed you. And I was in there and I was hammering around. So every day I'd go there before I'd go to the mill. About 5 days of that, I told one of the guys I was working with, I said, I think I'm going to take off. He said, where are you going? I said, well, I've always wanted to go to Sweden. And I think I'm going to take off tomorrow. Because I had no ties whatsoever. He said, if you stay here, Daniel will make sure you get to go to Sweden. I said, all right, I'll give it another week or two. 49 years later.
You ready to Sweden? He
I did go to Sweden.
Daniel
Not
said-
then. I went to Sweden 20 years later. But I did go to Sweden.
And
Anyway.
Daniel made sure he went.
And I just, the lifestyle, it was different, but the lifestyle was something I fell in love with. And I also fell in love with the Spirit. And I'm talking about something that you can live by, something you can base your life on, a spiritual walk that no one knows that it's a spiritual walk except you. And I know a lot of people have a spiritual walk, but I had a spiritual walk along with a huge brotherhood of people that I could depend on, people that I knew would come and help me work on something, or if I had a trouble, I could go to one of them and ask for their wisdom. Now, wisdom is formed in the crucible of adversity. And that just means that if you're not having hardships, you're not learning nothing. So I always ask God not to teach me nothing else.
Very good, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, did Daniel have any kids to carry on the,
Yes, Daniel has several children. The one who's kind of in charge now is Aaron Wright, and he's his son, not his oldest son. He's 60, and he's kind of in charge in that he's in charge.
Back to Micah.
He's in charge. He's in charge. He kind of has the final say, along with Jim, one of Daniel's other sons. Is Jim's oldest son? Yeah, his oldest son Jim still lives there. And there's a group of younger men who've kind of formed a little kind of a committee to make big decisions. And then there's a group of 7 trustees, kind of, who are on the board of Padanaram Inc. So, but he does have lots of children. Actually, Daniel does, and several of them still live in the valley.
thank you.
One more thing, the land, the 3,000 acres is the one thing Daniel wanted to leave. Before he died, he wanted to buy, see, God said, I'll show you my valley. Now we own all of that, and a valley is, when you come off of a ridge, there's the valley. We own 99% of it. There's still one family on the hill that we haven't bought from yet. And I said, Daniel, we're never going to buy from them. He said, well, we'll just outlive them. And at that time, I thought, what are you talking about? Outlive them. Then I realized how short life is and how many generations are behind me to, take up the crusade or whatever you want to call it and outlive them. Because we will have all of that valley. But Daniel's number one thing was before he died, he wanted to have that valley. And what we would do is a piece of property would come up for sale, we'd buy it, we'd cut the logs off of it, and we would pay for a lot of it. And so that's how we bought from 86 acres. When I first got to Padanaram, we had about 500 acres. I came to Padanaram when it was 9 years old, and now it's 60 years old. So we had about, I think, 500 acres, 600 acres. And we'd keep buying, and there's still 2 or 3 little parcels that we're still we have to get before we have all of God's valley. So it's been an exciting time, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. The wisdom that you acquire dealing with people so closely, and what you have to put up with a spectrum, of people. We call the spectrum the piano keys. There's the big bass key. He can take a lot of pressure. Them big high keys, that wire's kind of little, so don't put too much pressure on that guy. But what you want to be is right here in the middle C. You want to be right there. You're good this way, you're good that way, and you're just trying to go straight.
But we need all keys to make the piano
We need
play.
the whole key set, but
All 88. Any other questions?
Fantastic.
go ahead.
People are welcome to just drive around, and I've never been there, and I've always been fascinated.
Well, yeah, you could give us a call or something, I mean, what it is, it's a county road that comes into the place. And it's not our personal driveway. It's a county road. The county takes care of it. You can go down there anytime you want and ask to see somebody, or just start asking questions. But it would be better if you knew somebody, and then they could kind of direct you better. You get a better look at it.
So the roads are not blocked off
No.
anymore?
Oh no, they never were.
They never were blocked.
Oh, I disagree with you on
That not blocked off. They were never blocked
They've
off.
never been blocked off.
It's a county road.
I know it's a county, I'm well aware of it.
Is the road to Kale open now?
No,
It's not.
that might be what you're talking about, the back road.
Well, I'm a former resident of Silverville,
Okay.
and I kind of have different impression of things. And I know at one time Daniel had the road in and on the far side of it blocked off that you could not get into it. And that, but that may have been back in the 60s before
Maybe.
you got there in 75.
Yeah.
It wasn't locked off in 72 when I moved there.
But it
Yeah.
was blocked off.
Maybe in the
People were
60s,
not
at the
allowed to
early
drive through
60s, yeah.
there.
Yeah, we've had all kinds of things happen. In the early years, there was a farmer that was mad that took his plow and drug big ditches to try to wash the road out on Padanaram. There was lots of back and forth between farmers and the villagers. A lot of it was, you know, probably growing pains or whatever, but it's all been resolved now.
It's like everything else, there's two sides to each story.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
Kale was blocked off because the county didn't take care of the road.
But the county road now it's maintained by Martin County, and so you can drive down it anytime you want, and it goes back out, it's paved, Sawmill Hill is paved back out. You can drive through it anytime.
Do you have open houses anymore?
We don't, you know, after Daniel died, nobody's really pulled it together. Huh?
You should.
I know, we should.
That would be you know, people just don't know.
They don't.
They're not educated with this. This was excellent. We were just saying, excellent program.
And just like any, you know, there's a Hatfield and McCoy aspect to it, you know, with some of the families. But that's the one family that we don't own. That property is kind of a Hatfield and McCoy. That's what Daniel settled us out of. Any other questions?
I was there with my family. My dad was very interested, about 70 or 71. And it was like this 3-story sort of rough apartment type building. Is that still there?
Yeah. Well, that one burned, yeah. There is a 3-story, that wasn't the barn, but there was a couple of buildings that burnt over the years.
Different fire.
They called it the log lodge, and it burnt. But we do have a 3-story multi-family building there.
Still.
We have 2 of them, actually.
They still have cracks between the doors.
Probably.
That was my impression as a 12-year-old.
I don't think so, they've done a lot of,
Oh, to kind of answer what you're talking about, the road and all that, a lot of times, like when Padanaram was first purchased, it was deer haven for the deer hunters. The deer hunters just love being there. And our people are just the same as all people anywhere, and it's a little city. So this little city might have made some had or rash decisions in those early days when we were growing up, you know. But it's more mature now. There's a lot more maturity. We see that people aren't after us to get us. I mean, to answer your question about the road, it might have been closed, yeah. If you saw it was closed, it was closed. But it's become a far more mature community now. Yeah, and it's not a lot of gunplay. You know, I mean, I'm talking about when Phase 1 was going on. You remember the Phase 1 story? It was wild cowboys. I mean, I've stood between people. Listen. I've stood between.
That's right, thank you.
I've stood between 2 guys with a shotgun aimed at me before in Phase 1. You know, it was rough and tumble.
Which is the mindset of people that do it, the times in America in the 60s and 70s.
Absolutely. And you know, listen to this. Part of Padanaram was a keg a night.
That's how they built Padanaram.
1 keg a night.
Beer.
And guess what? On Saturday you got a keg and a half. We have a picture. Well, O'Brien's Liquors, Everybody knows Pat. If you don't, you should. When the brewing companies would need kegs, they'd send Pat to our place. Because on the back of this 40-foot long building, about 8 feet in the air, was nothing but kegs lined up. Because we got a keg every night and a keg and a half on Saturday.
Keep in mind, you had a bunch of young men working for no money. You gotta get them out of bed for some reason to go work in that log yard. You promise them beer at night, they're gonna go work. You promise them a new pair of jeans when they need it and all the cigarettes they can smoke, they're gonna go do the work that you need them to do. And that's how the valley was built. The valley was built on beer, blood, sweat, and tears.
If you went there on Saturday night, you ate well, you ate like kings, and you drank all you want.
That's exactly right. They would bring out steak to the loggers in the field. Yeah, they would bring T-bone steaks out.
Did it at least once, Larry.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you got to gather a group of young ruffian people with no rules and no law to go to work every morning, Larry's job was to go wake them all up. He had a heck of a job trying to drag those sorry butts out of bed to go to work. Because they were not the most motivated people in the world. So, but it got done.
When I got done with them, they were.
Oh, yeah. He was really mean back then, so I've heard.
I was a little different.
But yeah, so there was a lawless, rough and tumble time, probably from 60 to 80. My guess.
That's the phase 1 years I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And it's easier to explain it that way. You know, that the phase 1, like, if you want to see a really good example of the 5 different phases, rent that movie called Judge Roy Bean. It is a perfect example of
Judge
what,
Roy Bean.
it's a perfect example of not only how Padanaram was built, but the Americas.
We've gone over time, but I want to say one other thing is we left out a whole section of Padanaram's history that Joy was a huge part of in Arizona. And there was property and still is property in Arizona. That would take a whole nother story. There's so much and so many layers that you could talk about. And we just glossed over the high level stuff. And there's some things that were really hard. There were some things that were really joyful. There was other adventures. There was adventures into Costa Rica. There was adventures all over the place. But we can't, go into everything in just an hour and 15 minutes.
Maybe we can organize an open house this year.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
That'd be pretty good. All right.
Anytime you
well
have
done.
questions answered, go over to the mulch yard and talk to him. He's there Monday through Saturday.